if you can't do that, then that's when you'd actually have to go and write a custom controller component. So that's a pretty low-level integration. What is the benefit for me as a component deployer? I already have a given component model, be that Spring or Juice or OSGI. What benefit does this provide for me? Well, basically, if we have an integration layer for that component model, you should be able to use those services, and in addition, actually have interaction between those component models in terms of dependency injection, dependencies, and that type of thing. Right, so what I want to mostly spend today on is looking at how I would take the juice model of dependency injection, which added which was the motivation for a lot of the features in the JSR 299 WebBeans model, how I would take that and integrate that into the MC framework such that I can have a Juice Pojo talking to an MC Pojo and vice versa. Alesh will show a more extensive model around the OSGI and class loading tomorrow. Okay. So quickly, Juice is an injection framework that has a notion of modules that are capable of resolving injection references. Okay. It has this @inject annotation that identifies where do I want dependency injection based on a service interface contract. So for example, in this little client snippet, what I'm saying is I have this Pojo client constructor that should have a service injected into it that matches whatever my configured modules identify as the binding of that service reference, right? So what I want to show today is a deployment of a Juice Pojo that is going to mix both the Juice deployment model, or the Juice component model, with the MC component model. Right, and what we have here is, again, a little Pojo that implements a common interface, iPojo, through this abstract Pojo base class. And I'm using the Juice injection framework to say that I want to set my MC Pojo to a Pojo that's been annotated with from MC. And from MC is a JBoss specific annotation, right? So we're going to have to configure the Juice framework to have a module system that can resolve that reference. Okay, and I'll show you how we do that. We're going to have an implementation of a basic MC Pojo. It implements the same base interface. And then I'm going to have an MC Pojo that is actually interacting or taking an injection of the Juice Pojo. So we have cross injection between component models. And in this case, my from Juice Pojo has a reference to an MC Pojo. That was that previous MC Pojo I showed. We're going to have an injection of that first Juice Pojo that I showed. Right? So that's a separate component coming from a separate component model. And we're going to use a feature of the MC that basically allows for contextual injection. So we don't have any Juice-specific annotation that identifies, that I need a Juice Pojo. We're simply basing it on the fact that I have a reference to that class, that implementation of the Juice Pojo class. Then here we validate that the plain MC Pojo that are injected in this bean as well as the Juice bean are going to be the same, the exact same reference, that we properly resolved a reference to an external MC beam to the same instance. Okay. Right. So how do we perform that integration in the MC? Right. Basically, all we need to do is create a implementation of that kernel registry entry plugin that I showed on the first slide that allows me to do a lookup based on some criteria when it's presented a reference, right? And the two pieces that entails are this Juice kernel registry entry plugin bean and an implementation of the Juice module system here, the Pojo module. All right, let's take a quick look at that code to see how simple that is. So the POJO module bean is an implementation of the JUICE module system, which is what is responsible for configuring how do I resolve references of JUICE injections. Right? So the classes in red are basically coming from the JUICE API. The classes in blue are either JBoss annotations or references to MC classes, as well as implementation that we're providing as part of this demo. So the POJO module is itself going to be deployed as an MC bean, and we're using some MC annotations to identify what's the constructor that should be used, and referencing that what I want injected into this POJO when it's created is an instance of the MC controller. Right? So that's a well-known constant that defines the name of the controller that this bean will be deployed in. Then we have an implementation of the JUICE module configuration method, and here's where we're setting up the key bindings between interface types. In the first case, we're setting that any reference to a controller that's injected is going to be this JBoss controller instance that was passed into the constructor. We're setting a binding between that iPOJO interface class to an instance of that POJO class as a singleton. And then we're saying that anytime we see an iPOJO interface that's been annotated with that from MC annotation that I showed in the previous slide, we're going to map that onto the microcontainer or plain POJO bean. Right? So that's going to be a deployment or a POJO in the MC layer versus, in this case, this will be a POJO that lives in the JUICE component model layer. So the kernel registry plugin is a pretty simple method that is called whenever a controller context or a controller tries to do a reference for a component based on its name. Right? The name's arbitrary. It can be anything from a string to a class to whatever the controller model identifies as the key for that component model. And here what we're doing is two different things. One, if we're passed a class, which will be the case for typically contextual injection, when I have a reference to injection via an interface or a class, right? So that would be an injection on a field or a method, a property setter. Or if I have a binding of the JUICE key, then in both cases I'm going to dispatch those to the injector that we set up based on those modules, the POJO modules that I defined, right? Those are part of the JUICE API. In other words, those are the only types of lookups that I can handle from this kernel registry entry. Anything else, I'll fail and return null. And the way that the MC handles kernel registry plugins is they're basically handled as a list of these modules, and only the first one that successfully returns a non-null value will be used as the lookup value. Right? So in terms of a demonstration of how do I actually combine these modules under an MC deployment, here we have an MC deployment fragment where I'm deploying an instance of that plain POJO. I'm deploying that from JUICE, which is going to be a user of both the MC POJO injection as well as JUICE injection. So in the first case, we're simply injecting the plain POJO right here that was defined here. And in this case, here I'm referencing a property that had as a type the JUICE POJO class. So this is a contextual injection saying I need to find a component that was deployed in the MC that matches that type. Now that's the only mechanism by which we're referencing it. We don't have a name. We don't have any JUICE specific APIs, right? We're simply going to resolve that based on the type. Right? So that's a pretty brief illustration of how we can mix component models in the MC and JBoss AS. If you want more information, certainly check out the MC project, in particular Alesh's Developer Zone article, which goes over this example plus a few other use cases, which include M-beans, injecting Spring and MC beans, as well as M-beans, legacy M-beans across these various component models. Right? He also gives a second follow-up article on this that further talks about the various types of dependency injection that we support in JBoss. Okay. Thank you. And if you want your t-shirts, see Jen in the corner, right here.